Tell us about COD. I mean, a lot of people, everyone orders COD. I personally hate COD.
Yes, such an interesting area. So much I can say on it. We as TCS sit in the middle of the value chain, right? So we sit between the e-commerce merchant, a company like TCS, which has been in last mile delivery from inception. Doorstep delivery of a COD is very different in terms of unit economics. We have bad addresses which are captured on their system, passed on to us. When our couriers go out into the field, very often they struggle. So bad addresses is a huge issue. People take the shipment, they'll want to rip it open, they'll want to examine it, and then they'll return it. And our SOP very clearly is you accept it, sealed, and that's it. We are not going to then accept back an open shipment.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of All Things Money, and today we've got Ms. Saira Awan, who is the president of TCS, which is essentially the largest courier company in the country, and all we're going to talk about is essentially logistics in this episode. How are you, Saira?
Very well, thank you.
Saira, tell us about how does TCS operate? What do you guys do?
So TCS started life in 1983. At a time when postal services were pretty much as inefficient as they still are. So the real gap in the market, in the domestic space, was of an efficient and reliable delivery mechanism that could reach initially the main commercial centers. We started life primarily doing banking, deliveries for valuable check transactions to expedite that process. So, starting from there, we grew out our delivery mechanism, which of course now is, after the post office, it's the largest delivery mechanism in the country. We serve the entire length and breadth of Pakistan. We have about 2,500 service locations. And we take great pride in the fact that we laid down the delivery infrastructure for Pakistan and really set the standard and the benchmark for reliable and efficient deliveries in the courier express parcel segment. As our business evolved and as we became closer to our customers that relied on us heavily, we realized that there was greater need for logistic services. And therefore, the company has really grown organically along both B2B and B2C tracks. So whilst we have a sizable B2B component where we service pretty much every sector of the economy from banking, government, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, education, fashion, retail, manufacturing, etc., all the way to the B2C segment where we provide services to households, to families, to students, to individuals, and to very, very small businesses. So that's really our universe. It's a very wide universe, and both horizontally and vertically, it's widespread. And I must mention, where I talked about organic growth, as we grew, we realized that this need for greater logistic services. And currently, where we stand, the state of play is that TCS, whilst it has been the market leader in the courier express parcel segment, has also now more and more become an integrated third-party logistics provider, which involves the provision of another whole array of services, including trucking, transportation, warehousing, end-to-end facilitation. And in addition, there were a few other businesses that grew alongside our core business, such as gift delivery, Sentiments Express. We have a home packing service. We have visa facilitation, travel and tours, digital printing. So it's a very expansive world. The core, of course, it started out as a courier company, but we now see ourselves more and more as a end-to-end logistics company.
Yeah. So the core would be basically moving goods from point A to point B. That is the ultimate objective, how efficiently you do it.
Yes.
That is what makes or breaks a thing. So courier is a difficult business. For example, you've got very high fixed costs. you need that infrastructure. And there are high barriers to entry as well. You need that network, you need those bikes, you need those trucks. So this is a very high fixed cost. And given how there are also very high variable costs, given how petrol works, given how the fuel prices change, so on and so forth. But there are also a lot of players in the market. You've got big players, you've got small players, you've got players just focusing on one city or even one region at this point. It's fairly competitive as well. How are you able to, let's say, maintain your margins or pricing power? For example, let's say if I can send something via TCS for 500 rupees, someone else can send the same thing for 400 rupees.
Right.
So how do you operate in such a competitive?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think the first thing I would say is that when we look at TCS really as a conglomerate of all these different services, each vertical has its own dynamic and has its own sort of comparable margin as well. So warehousing has a very different margin than the courier business, right? And when we look at our business holistically, we don't see any other player that is competing with us in all the verticals in which we operate. Now, having said that, of course, we have competition in each of the different verticals. And let's take our main vertical, which is our courier express parcel, the CEP segment, right? Over there, initially, TCS had the bulk of market share. Over time, as is expected, competition came in and, they did, make their own investments, grew their own networks, etc. But what we find is that those tend to be low-cost options available in the market. We still pride ourselves on the fact that our service and our delivery is the best, and that is what customers pay for the trust, the reliability, as well as the efficiency. What I have seen is that the courier segment has become increasingly commoditized. And as a result, it is increasingly more and more difficult to differentiate, say, between a TCS and another competitor in the market. So the question that we are really focusing on is, how do we continue to innovate? What is the real value add beyond trust, which of course is a huge factor, but beyond trust and reliability, what else can we do?
I think that's a great point when you say, the business has been commoditized, which means margins are super thin at this point.
Yes.
So any growth would largely be in terms of, let's say, the number of orders you push or the number, and whatever the turnover is. Yeah. So what has been the strategy of TCS over the last few years, given the influx of so many competitors and completely new areas opening up like e-commerce? How has TCS been going or coping with all this?
So the strategy has very much been that we need to focus on our service and we need to continue doing what we do in the best way possible. Competition has not really fazed us, and I can delve a little bit more specifically into the competition that we saw recently, say in the last 5 to 10 years, particularly in the e-commerce or the COD space. I think competition generally is in a general sense, it's good to have competition. It keeps you on your toes. So to that extent, competition is not, and with the downward pressure on rates and prices, there are some customers that we feel we want to shed, and it's good that there are other providers that can pick. We see ourselves as moving more and further higher up in the value chain. And so competition does not really faze us. Our strategy has not been reactive. We have been focused on our own growth. TCS is a very pioneering company, and actually encoded in the DNA of TCS is a great entrepreneurial spirit, which comes directly from my father, the chairman, Mr. Khalid Awan, who set this company up. And I'll just mention, our most recent pioneering initiative is our regional connectivity initiative, where we are focusing beyond the domestic market. And we're saying, okay, this market, we understand it best, we've got it covered. We have our eyes set much higher. So again, just a short answer to your question is, we see ourselves as moving up the value chain. And, that's always been our strategy. It's been one of organic growth. We have not had external investment in. We have not relied on, external funding. And that gives its own sort of trajectory to our growth, which has been very autonomous.
So that's a good point, actually. It's a fairly completely family-owned business. That just provides you with more flexibility to do what you feel is correct rather than be at the mercy of external investors or other minority shareholders.
Correct.
So we talk about expanding regionally. Tell us more about it. Like, what's happening there? Do you think that the necessary level of volumes are there? Because I would believe those would be bulk trade or bulk volume, and those are also very thin margin businesses. So how is that working?
So the regional connectivity opportunity is a very interesting one. Basically, what's happened is because of Pakistan's geopolitical, location, because of the fact that trade with India doesn't exist, Iran has been sanctioned. We saw that there's a great desire for Central Asian republics to access just like there has been for China through CPEC, to access the warm water ports in Pakistan. And so, even at the government level, there's been increased activity engaging with the governments of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Kazakhstan. We have a transit trade agreement with Uzbekistan. We have a preferential trade agreement with them as well. So really following the high level, let's call it the geopolitical move in that direction in any case, what we started thinking was that how can we, primed as we are with our deep relationships with the customers at this end and, with our control over the logistics landscape here, how can we facilitate trade in a way that can benefit this overall regional impetus? So what we did was, we are very proud to say that we have an office in Tashkent. There's TCS Uzbekistan, which is an incorporated entity. We have a team there. And what we have done is that we have actually opened up the land route from Karachi to Tashkent. And that is a bit of a sole distinction that TCS has. It required a lot of grit, a lot of courage, a great vision to follow, because Afghanistan is not the easiest terrain to navigate. But another development that happened was that there is an international road transportation convention called the TIR. Pakistan finally completed the formalities for entering the TIR convention. It's Geneva-based, the International Road Transport Union. And Pakistan entered it in 2016 after fulfilling all the necessary formalities. TCS was the first Pakistani company that then domestically fulfilled the requirement to get a TIR license. Now, what TIR does is that when you have a cargo that has to cross countries, the borders of different countries, it does not have to be opened and checked at every customs check. Much like the way trade happens within the EU. And so now, as per the TIR convention, when you load a cargo truck in Karachi, it can go all the way to Tashkent in a sealed way, subject to a certain bill which is called the Carnet. And that is a system, an integrated system that has been already agreed upon by the customs of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and all the countries. We've been very, very involved at the policy level, at the government level, at the highest levels of setting up this system. So when, as the first sort of leader in this space, we started sending shipments all the way to Tashkent, some very funny, interesting stories of what happened to our trucks in the earlier trials. As I mentioned, Afghanistan is not the easiest place. But so far to date, we have done about 400 commercial container loads from Karachi to Tashkent. We also did a multimodal shipment to Azerbaijan. Multimodal involving the different, because it was land, and then we also transported by sea over the Caspian Sea. So this space is very exciting. There is, as you know, the potential for regional trade. Countries should have, in Europe, it's about 30-40% of trade is within the EU. Pakistan regional trade is only about 5 to 6%. So there's great scope for growth. And what we see is there's transit and there's bilateral. Overwhelmingly transit trade, where the Central Asian republics, we're transporting palm oil and all sorts of other requirements all the way, through Pakistani territory. But there is a pickup also in bilateral trade, primarily on pharmaceuticals. So that is the sort of facilitation that we're providing.
Okay, that's interesting. So this just makes me think that there's a gradual transition from small ticket shipments to more larger ticket shipments, and TCS is evolving into more of a regional trade player rather than just a local logistics provider.
Well, both. It's not that we're retreating from this business.
Got the first mover advantage there.
Yes.
So the competition is less.
Yes,
so
correct.
Definitely there's a lot more room to grow there.
Yes.
than in a segment where, there are like hundreds of competitors and the margins are fairly static.
Correct. And there's a reason why there's hardly any competition then, because it's uncharted territory.
Uncharted territory. So you've got more room to, let's say, really double down on it and
Yes.
keep making, doing more shipments. You're doing 400 right now, 4,000 in a few years, and 40,000 in like 5 years at this point.
Yes, I hope so. And the great potential for boosting our own exports. That's really the excitement here. How do we improve Pakistan's own trade volumes?
That's perfect. So tell us about COD. I mean, a lot of people, everyone orders COD. I personally hate COD because a lot of friction, yes, cash isn't available, stuff comes, it's bad stuff. And this, I feel, has constrained the growth of the overall e-commerce market in the country. What are your thoughts on this? Because you're literally basically laid the foundation of COD and you probably know more about it.
Yes, it's such an interesting area. So much I can say on it. So yes, you're right. We as TCS sit in the middle of the value chain, right? So we sit between the e-commerce merchant and the end customer who is ordering the shipment. The first point to mention is that this sort of last mile delivery is the most challenging, even for a company like TCS, which has been in last mile delivery from inception, right? Because initially we used to deliver documents, and that was a very different cost base and timing planning, route planning, etc. Because doorstep delivery of a COD parcel is very different in terms of unit economics than a delivery of a document. So we've had to overhaul and retool and re-equip our own systems, processes, hubs, the way we carry things, the way we incentivize our staff, how do we measure their performance, all of that has changed and is evolving. So the first thing to mention is unit economics on e-commerce deliveries are much higher, also because there's a wait time. The courier comes to the doorstep, he has to wait for the person to get the cash. There's, the parcel has to be handed over. Our people, even at home, the whole issue with bad addresses, such a big problem. People who are making bookings online, because our e-commerce merchants do not yet uniformly have a standardized system for collecting or capturing addresses, which in the West is pretty standardized now. You have 3 or 4 sort of layers, and you fill in those details as postcodes, etc. Here we don't have structured zip codes. We have bad addresses which are captured on their system. It's passed on to us. When our couriers go out into the field, very often they struggle. So bad addresses is a huge issue. The other issue, practically, there's so many things that you encounter. People who receive the shipment and then they decide that actually they want to return it. Just yesterday in our office, we had some feedback from our couriers who said, people take the shipment, they'll want to rip it open, they'll want to examine it, and then they'll return it. And our SOP very clearly is that you accept it sealed, and that's it. We are not going to then accept back an open shipment. But customers need to be educated. E-commerce merchants need to be educated so that they can put in the correct mechanisms at their end. And also, there is a huge issue with trust. There's a big trust deficit. You yourself mentioned that you are suspicious of this whole space, right? So the other interesting thing that ends up happening is that when somebody, orders, say, a phone from XYZ Limited in Karachi, the delivery happens in Peshawar, our guy goes and delivers it. It's not a phone, it's a brick, okay? So then they get really angry. They're saying, TCS ne galat delivery ki, and then they go on social media and all of the... Now, the thing is that how do you educate the end customer that it's not, we are simply the middleman, we're simply the facilitator. So there are a lot of issues. And of course, let me end on the biggest issue is cash collection, cash reconciliation. We collect at least on a daily basis 130 to 150 million rupees of cash across the country. Now remember, these are our couriers who are, operating in distant locations, in city centers where law and order is. So how do you then collect that cash, reconcile it, then make sure that the transfer happens? So a lot of concerns.
Has always been my contention that the last problem should be the easiest one to solve through digital payments.
Yeah.
It got at least about 70, 80 million mobile wallets in the country. People send money through it all the time. It's not really an economic startup thing.
Why hasn't there?
You know how many are functional out of those 7?
They are many.
Because I work in the digital.
Yeah. So how many are functional? How many are actually being?
I would say even about 20 million.
Yeah.
They're fairly active. So
My view there is, why hasn't there been a strong push from the likes of courier companies? Hey, cash collection is a difficult problem, guys. If you, let's say, you need to incentivize the e-commerce vendor, if it's a digital payment, your courier fee can be 20% lower. Now, at that point, the e-commerce vendor is incentivized to work out some kind of a digital payment structure. Right now, they're like, fine, they're getting cash. I'm going to get cash in like week 10 days, big deal.
Yeah.
But when you give a sweetener that, okay, with a 20% reduced courier rate, because again, cash collection, cash management, that's a lot of cost at your end.
Yeah.
If the digital payments, everything's efficient. So the digital rails are there, the adoption is there. Somehow, all courier companies across the world have not been able to really hang on to it. Why is that?
A few points. First of all, I put this down primarily to a customer behavior issue. Cash is king in Pakistan still, right? And the move away from cash to digital is a far bigger problem or a far bigger issue to tackle than simply on the COD front. So let's just assume that people tend to prefer using cash. As a courier company, let me just assure you, we have tried our level best to engage not just with banks, with digital payment providers, with the likes of EasyPaisa and JazzCash, to try to move customers in this direction. But then a lot of responsibility for this also falls on the e-commerce merchants, because right now, out of all their shipments, maximum maybe about 2 to 5% are even prepaid on their own websites, right? So that is an issue which needs to be solved. I personally, at this point, am not too optimistic that we will see wholesale sort of digital adoption anytime soon. I think we need to make the moves in that direction. We are certainly prepared. We want to partner. We also are making moves and trying to see if we can become the digital wallet so that we collect the cash. Let's not touch customer behavior. We collect the cash, we become the agent, and then we reconcile it internally. But the payment is the internal reconciliation happens in a digital way. Watch this space. I think let's keep our fingers crossed. It's a huge pain point for us.
So why doesn't, what we've seen is TCS evolved as a conglomerate, doing all sort of things that essentially contribute towards one vision. Has TCS ever considered becoming a payments company? Because if it does, you suddenly become one of the bigger payment companies out there.
Yes.
Considering how much cash is sloshing around in your system.
Yes. So the short answer is yes, we have considered it, and we are actively considering it still. So again, hopefully at some point I'll be able to give you some update on this point.
Hopefully something actually works out on COD. Yes. Because I just feel it's a major pain point for the merchant, for the consumer, for the courier. It's a pain point for everyone at this point. So and the solution is out there. Yeah. It's a market-oriented solution, but somehow it's not gelling in. Why? I just can't figure. Maybe it's a customer issue where they're like, if I have to return it, it's a trust issue as well. I normally used to pay via credit card through everything, but first of all, I just don't order anything online anymore because you get bricks or you get like bad towels or something like that. Yeah. So there's a trust issue there. Yeah. And the other thing is, if I prepay, what if the goods don't get delivered? Exactly. So one thing here is, or one solution that has been adopted in a lot of countries essentially is payment through an electronic medium at the time of delivery, through scan of a QR code, through something like that. Has this been explored?
That's exactly what we're exploring, that QR code payment at the time of delivery. So the shipment is there, and that's when the payment is made, and it's captured digitally. But there are a lot of issues in this. Even in terms of the customers, so we've been exploring this with some of the leading banks in terms of how do we digitize that particular interaction, right? Not that many people have cards to make payments with. Also, let's look at customer behavior here. Who is usually at home to receive those payments, right? If you're going to be expecting your house help to be receiving the payment, they're certainly not going to have the means. That means people should be at home at that time. That leads to its whole other logistics, So, we already, we make calls to people before we go. We send them SMS alerts. But there are times when our couriers go, there's nobody at home. So when you're expecting it's all those sort of things. How do you make sure that that interaction happens on time in the most efficient way digitally?
Yeah,
That's the dream.
my mother's always angry at me. You got a shipment, you didn't tell me now.
Yeah.
Where's the cash?
Exactly.
And I'm at office. Like,
Yes.
"Kya
Now
karu?"
you tell her to use the card.
No,
The question is,
it's a whole.
It's just a lot of friction that happens, and the friction is across the value chain.
Yes.
I'm better off saying, I'd rather not order, go to
The shop, buy it, and be done with.
I therefore put it down to a behavior issue. Customer behavior has to change, and e-commerce merchants have the responsibility to instill trust in the system, because until that is there, customers will not part with their cash.
Oh, perfect. All right. So a lot of things that they're doing, it's a great conversation with COD, by the way. A lot of things that we're doing in Pakistan over the next 5 years, essentially agriculture. And one thing in agriculture is one major pain point of why we're not able to export a lot of agriculture, agri-produce, is essentially
Cold chain infrastructure.
why haven't been able to develop that? Because again, you know more about warehouses and logistics than anyone else in this country. Why haven't been able to develop a temperature controlled logistics network across the country, which can enable us to essentially start exporting more of our agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a waste when we look at about 40% of fruits and vegetables just get destroyed, right, on the way. Dairy is another huge area, right, where one of the biggest dairy producers, and a lot of wastage in that segment as well. Look, I mean, the short answer is warehousing is a very capital intensive business to be in, right? Already the moves that we see are, you have MNCs, you have bigger groups that are actually looking to outsource their third-party logistics. So when we look at the opportunity for a player like TCS, and we've massively expanded our warehousing footprint, so we are now about 1.5 million square feet of warehousing. When you look at that, so we're on the, we're sort of increasing that, and the reason is because we see this increased reliance on players like us for third-party logistics services. What are the issues? I mean, huge investment costs. It's essentially a real estate play. We don't have electronic warehouses. We don't have automated warehouses where real-time inventory calculation is happening. I mean, things are still at a very basic level in Pakistan, right? Having said that, I'll explain to you what TCS has been able to do so far. So, we run a very, very state-of-the-art warehouse in Karachi. I can take you there one day to have a look. It's for a global player called Medtronics. We do, we store very sort of sensitive medical equipment. We also do temperature-sensitive warehousing for pharmaceutical sector. Now, again, this is a beginning. We need to scale this up. Other players have not been able to do it because perhaps they don't see the sort of returns. But we are committed to this space. And the next logical step after this will be, in addition to the warehousing, you move into actual cold chain line haul movements, where we have the reefers, which TCS does have a few of, but certainly not enough. And of course, the government has to be working with the private sector in this. There's been a recent, moves towards what is the electronic warehousing receipt financing, right, for farmers, etc. That's a very positive move. More along that needs to happen, and I think again, business follows demand, right? And this demand is growing. We certainly are making investments in this space.
So by the way, I've worked on a few transactions on core storages.
Yeah.
And one thing that we figured there are two things here. Again, it's a classic real estate play. Real estate is expensive, so you have to be located outside the city, which is fine. But then the construction cost of having the right materials in to ensure the necessary level of insulation. And then the energy cost associated with
absolutely.
that. So that just completely destroys economics for storing any kind of fruits and vegetables. So I totally agree with you there that if it's high value items that's like medicine or medical devices, it just makes sense there.
Yes.
But if it's something for like say mangoes, it just doesn't make sense because the cost is too high. So what do you think the government can do? You mentioned the government. And what do you think the state can do here?
I think, the way that the whole agricultural supply chain is structured with the mandis and the middleman, and, I think, we need to work very closely to see how those established systems can then be made more efficient. As I said, I think farmers need to be incentivized. there needs to be some support for this sort of investment because, like we've just agreed, it's prohibitive for most players to invest in this. So, and the good news is that the government has recently recognized transport and logistics as an industry. So when you have industry status, I think that's a very positive move on the part of the government. Then, of course, you do have, access to certain sort of financing. You have industry status, I think, is going to lead to a lot of benefits for the sector, which hopefully we will continue to see, and even players like us are going to realize to grow it.
So, talking about the road transportation network, I am personally a big believer in rail transport rather than road transport. It's just more inefficient. And in fact, just before the show, I was talking to someone, it's like, why don't we electrify our railway lines?
Yeah.
Why don't we electrify railway locomotive? The cost of shipping would drastically reduce, and that has a multiplier effect.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So a really interesting fun fact on that. So when you talk about 1 ton and 1 gallon of fuel, that can cover 200 and I believe that it is 260 or 290 miles by rail and 90 miles by road. Okay, so that's the sort of efficiency that we're looking at, right? Everything goes a much longer way. It's a far more efficient way of doing logistics. The problem is that the railway infrastructure in Pakistan is falling apart. It is just not suited to the sort of volumes that we need to move. As TCS, we actually engaged very deeply in this a few years ago, and we realized that at this the state of play as it is right now, it didn't make sense for us to really partner with railways. But once railways, improves their own game, we are certainly open to that. So again, when we talk about the logistics landscape, right, we talk about multimodal. There's road, rail, air, and sea. And currently, we are in the road and the air segments. And I'll talk a little bit about the road segment that you asked about. So currently, logistics throughout the length and breadth of Pakistan is about 94%, 95% by road. But there are huge issues there because we have about 300 to 400,000 trucks that are going up and down. And remember, this is largely, predominantly, 90%, this is the informal sector. The 10% has formal players such as TCS, but predominantly it is the informal sector. You have owner-operators who will own maybe, 5 to 10 trucks, and they are out of the tax net. They are, completely, they don't have access to financing. And what's happening is that they are running fleets that are completely, more than 10 years old, 10 to 20 years old, old Bedford trucks, with their rigid suspensions. They destroy the roads. 50 billion rupees, I think, is an approximate spend on highway fixing every year. Maybe, 120. That mine was conservative, yeah. So you talk about highway, repairs constantly. And then, of course, the way that these goods are transported, there's law and order situations in the company. These are not insured goods. So how do you actually create reform within that sector? So what players like to, what do we do? So we have our own fleet of trucks, and we move them up and down the country. We are hoping that the government has now really cracked down on the axle load. There's implementation of the axle load reform that was around November. I think it was finalized. There need to be weigh bridges on all the major arteries, etc. So until the overall road transportation sector does not become more efficient, more formalized, and better equipped to handle the sort of volumes, logistics in Pakistan will remain beholden to these sort of very inefficient, and again, fuel inefficient. We talk about damage to roads, talk about, how much fuel they're using, etc. So there are a lot of issues with road transportation, and there's a lot that the government can do. I mentioned a few things, to actually...
Yeah, that's what I always mention. Where you talk about the problems, they're not resource problems, they're not demand problems, they're not supply problems, they're actually efficiency problems.
Yes.
Wherever you look, there's a lot that can be done, a lot of productivity can be improved just by making this more efficient. I fully agree with you that about 90% plus of the trucking sector is essentially informal, and this old vehicle shouldn't be on the road at all.
Yeah.
So what do you think the future of logistics looks like?
Like in the, let's say, the next 5 to 10
Yeah, well, just on that point of the road, if I may finish. So the thing is that, we talk about efficiency, but remember, efficiency also is preceded by investment, right?
Yeah.
And if we don't have the will, local players, and I mentioned the informal sector, they don't have the will or the means to be able to make these sort of large-scale investments in the logistics infrastructure, such as road transportation. There is need for at least, 80 to 100 to 200,000 new trucks. Now, this is a big investment, right? So the government needs to play a role in facilitating this, provide them access to finance, give them incentives for, investing in green vehicles, etc. So that's
So that's where my point is. Why should the government do that? The demand is there. The demand for moving goods is there.
yeah.
The supplier or the logistics provider is essentially moving those goods. Why aren't more formal players coming in that can essentially compete on efficiency? So let's say if someone's charging X rupees to move, let's say they charge 200,000 rupees to move a container from Karachi to Lahore. Someone with more efficient trucks, more efficient services can maybe charge 150,000, and then their turnover or the demand would certainly increase. Why isn't more formal
competition coming
So
in?
that is exactly our market. That's the space in which we operate. We give the higher value added service, better security for the products, etc., reliable, But at this point, I think, it is an underinvested sector.
Yeah.
And so, but as you said, I think your question again was, why should the government even support this? Look, at the end of the day, this is about making Pakistan more competitive in terms of its trade, boosting the quality, our exports, connectivity, both domestic, it will, and regional. The better our logistics infrastructure and framework is, the better our industry will be able to produce as well as export. And, again, the key role of logistics, and when we look at ourselves as an end-to-end logistics supply, when you look at, say, the manufacturing industry or the fashion industry or retail, you're talking about, starting from the first mile all the way through sourcing of materials, processing, storage, warehousing, inventory, and then you talk about last mile, whether it's B2B or B2C. So that entire value chain, the supply chain, ultimately the efficiency of our supply chains depends on the quality of our logistics infrastructure. That needs a lot of investment. But the reason is, Pakistani logistics industry was estimated, I read a recent figure, which was quoted by the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, at about 30 billion US dollars. Now, some would argue that's conservative. If you really open up regional trade and you really open up, the true value of Pakistan can be a logistics hub for the region, right? Including for traffic from China all the way to the Middle East, to Africa. You'd have Central Asia. We don't know if trade with India will open at some point. But that's the reason why the government also recognizes the importance of logistics. And we know they do.
So just to add there,
the government has already made enough roads and a motorway. They're probably one of the best motorway infrastructure and energy, any emerging or frontier economy. Invested tremendously, I would say, over-invested in that. What more do we want the government to do at this point? I mean, the road infrastructure is there. You can use it. I mean, even right now, motorways are underutilized by trucks. They just use a GT road. If you drive from Karachi to Islamabad, I used to drive all the time. On the motorway, you will barely see any transport company. They will still use the normal N5 or the GT road. So the infrastructure is there, but the market isn't really
ready to use that infrastructure.
The main reason is this underinvestment in the fleets.
Yeah.
Because once fleets are properly invested,
Sector thing, right?
that is the private sector. I think, NLC is doing some very good work. We see a lot of synergies with what the sort of work that they're doing, also regional connectivity. I think that, but it also goes beyond just the fleet is a big issue, investment, training drivers, getting the right certifications. Also, when we talk about regional trade, for example, we talk about the TIR convention, are our trucks, compliant with international standards? Currently, they're not. So we need to upgrade ourselves in a very holistic way before we are able to say, oh, look, there's this great road infrastructure. Are we really utilizing it in the best way possible? I agree with you, we're not. But I think that there are broader other issues that are also playing into why that.
So what the sense we get
Here is that the government should be incentivizing private sector to essentially upgrade its fleet, whether the policy interventions, whether that's through, let's say, more having some kind of a negative covenant, like say axle load regime or something like that, such that overall things can improve, that the fleet modernization can happen.
Yes. And the overall sort of expectation of abiding by standards, both in terms of driver safety and, fleet trucking, like I mentioned, the standardization. So all of that does need to come from the government, and access to financing as well, and incentivizing for going towards a more sustainable fleet. I mean, we're looking to, sustainability is a whole other area, of course, we can talk about, but when we talk about exorbitant fuel costs and we talk about big, we have a large network, how do you actually make yourself sustainable in a way that is...
I'll just come to that, something that I've been working on. You probably have one of the largest two-wheeler networks in the country. You've got the largest fleet around. Have you considered electrifying those bikes? If yes, what's really happening?
Yes, I can give you an update on that. So we launched a pilot predominantly in our Pindi Islamabad region on electric bikes. Now, the thing is, it's a very interesting, there are a lot of factors that come into play. Number one is the quality of the bikes that are actually available, right? Because we carry very heavy loads. So we need bikes that are not just simply electric bikes, but...
Not just frames, they need to be robust.
They cannot just be frames or scooties. They actually have to be robust. They have to have the correct quality of tire. They have to be able to carry the sort of loads that our courier boxes have. They should be able to, because, we go into every mohalla and all the ups and downs of the different, whether it's in urban centers or in rural areas. So are they able to cover those distances? Battery charging, I mean, we don't have charging stations in Pakistan. We currently did our pilot on a battery swapping mechanism. Again, that restricts us then to the urban centers. So we cannot actually expand at this point in time, given, where the charging issue is. In Pakistan, we don't have that infrastructure. Also, you look at the fact that, people are... this is an interesting, maybe a more lighthearted issue that came up within our own people were a little bit hesitant to move on to these because they felt that, they would much rather go by the old, habits are hard to break. I think it's hard to get people out of what they're used to. We give our couriers, fuel incentives, fuel allowances, etc. Now we need to reshape our entire, incentive and compensation to incentivize them actually to adopt electronic bikes, right? So there's a whole range of insights that we drew from this pilot. And I think at this point, really, the main one I would say is the quality of the actual bike for our purposes. Because our people are not just going around the city. They're, as I mentioned, they're carrying the loads. They're going on some rough roads as well. So we need longevity. We need really good quality. Until that product is available at the market at a commercially acceptable rate that makes sense for our unit economics. But we are committed to this, absolutely. And that is why we did this almost year-long pilot. And we will continue to look for the best options in the market.
Yeah. So on that, I'm sure, you've got a retail network everywhere at this point.
Yes.
Can't you have battery swapping stations
right at your retail network? Yes, I'm just thinking out loud here.
That's the pilot we did. We used our own retail network for the battery swapping.
And that can essentially become
a secondary income stream. We'll just talk about it later.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. I think this is good. So, Saira, ending words. What's going to happen in the 5-10 years if you're able to grow at a reasonable growth rate? If not, though, you know what's going to happen. But if you're able to grow at, let's say, 4 to 5% over the next 5 years, 10 years,
how do you think the logistics industry will shape up?
I'm actually very optimistic. I think I'm also very biased. I'm very passionate about this sector. I think 4 to 5% is pessimistic. It's conservative. I think the growth in logistics can be greater than that. As I mentioned, there is scope for growth in pretty much every vertical that is within TCS. And when you look at the broader logistics landscape within Pakistan as well, you mentioned railways. Can you imagine the efficiencies that can result if railways gets its act together?
Electrifying railways at this point, just the thought of it.
Yeah, just the thought of it. Exactly. Absolutely. So I think, logistics is a very, very exciting space. And so the question is, will we play our cards right? at the government level, at the policy level, at the private sector level, will we continue to, as a company, as a family, we are committed to the sector. We find it extremely, rewarding and we're passionate about it. So you're asking somebody who is very optimistic about the growth of logistics. Of course, the challenges are there, but I think as a sector, it is primed for growth.
Perfect. Thank you, Saira, for your time. It was
Thank you.
Wonderful call.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
All right, everyone. This was it for logistics. Maybe we'll talk about something else next time. Take care.